Welcome back to the Covenant Baptist podcast, where we spend 2025 and 2026 reading the Bible together. This week, we're going to look at the book of Esther. And if you'd like to catch up on previous books, you can go to covenantbaptistchurch.com/read-the-Bible. And like I said, we're going to look at the book of Esther. It's a book that's often referred to as the one with God behind the scenes. And that's because it doesn't contain one reference to the name of God in it. But just like Joseph's speech at the end of Genesis in Genesis 50, verse 20, God is most definitely, quietly, but powerfully at work for the good of those who love him behind the scenes. And we're going to see this. The book is organized really around three major feasts here. We start with the Feast of Xerxes or Ahasuerus in chapter 1, verse 1 to chapter 2, verse 23. Then we see another banquet that Esther brings forward. This is the Jewish exile that's there. A beautiful woman that it attracts the eye of Xerxes. And she sets up a banquet and the events surrounding that as the plot develops. That's in chapters 3, verse 1 through to chapter 7, verse 10. And then the first feast of Purim is celebrated as a celebration at the end of the book in chapters 8, verse 1 through to 10, verse 3. But the plot of the book revolves around the danger to the end of the Davidic line of kings. And that, of course, endangers a promise that God made to the kingdom of Israel and to David in the Davidic covenant back in 2 Samuel. And as you can see by this little graphic that I have, Esther actually comes in the middle of the book of Ezra. So we've just finished reading through, if you're following our plan, Ezra and Nehemiah. Basically, Esther drops in this little 58-year gap between Ezra 1 to 6 and Ezra 7 to 10. And it's all about God keeping his promise to the exiles that are still awaiting return. So we've had the first restoration comes under Zerubbabel, and they go and they build the altar and the temple. And then the second group that comes under Ezra is yet to come in 457 BC. So you have a 58-year gap between the first return and the second return. And this is when the events of Esther happen. Now, the tension in the book is all about the work of this man, Haman, who hated the Jews, and he has his quest to essentially exterminate them and remove the line. And thus, that would be something that would endanger God's covenant promises. And as we know from reading the scriptures, God indeed is working all things together, and he will accomplish his great purpose, which is to send a savior. And so we see that the plot resolved in the course of the book. Now, we read this as a family over the summer in our family worship time, and it was really an encouraging read because it's a beautiful picture of God's redemptive reversals. And just as you're reading through the book, my encouragement to you is just look for those things. Like just when things look bad, mourning turns into joy, death into deliverance, the rise of an evil man into the fall of an evil man, and then from the fear that Esther initially experiences to the courage she later boldly demonstrates with faith in God and his promise. All of this anticipates, of course, this is just a type and a shadow. Esther's just a type and a shadow, ultimately, of the great reversal of the Messiah himself, who came not as a warrior on a horse, but a baby in a manger, and who came not to judge the world, but to provide salvation through sacrifice, through going and in that, as J.R.R. Tolkien calls it, the eucatastrophic work of the cross, that eucatastrophe, which is a glorious catastrophe, which is, of course, the crucifixion of Jesus, which was a horrible crime, and yet God turned and reversed it into one of the greatest events of all time. The great reformer Martin Luther really disliked the book of Esther because of its lack of reference to God, and he even said that he wished it didn't exist. Well, I disagree with him on this, and ironically, I think it's also because God isn't named in the book that it actually strengthens his power and his presence, because there are so many factors and timings and things that must come together in his providential plan for it to have turned out the way that it did to preserve the people of Israel and preserve the Davidic line. So as you read, make sure you pay attention to the details. And one of the things that you'll see as you go through is there's so many things that have to fall in place for Israel to be delivered. Everything from the king's insomnia to the exact timing of Haman's entry into the court and the delays that occur with respect to Esther's requests and much more. And I just think from a very practical standpoint, living in a pluralistic society like Canada, it's worth mentioning that Israel was a minority that was constantly under threat as exiles in a foreign land, and yet God was working all the time behind the scenes for his glory. And I think just living in the contemporary situation that we are, the encouragement is that even though it sounds like or feels like sometimes God is absent, he's not. He is at work, working together all things for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose. So my hope is that as you read about his working behind the scenes in the book of Esther, that you will see more clearly how he's at work in our lives and in our world today. Well, that's what we have for Esther. We'll see you probably in about a week's time on our CBC Reading the Bible Together podcast as we look at the amazing book of Job in a week or so.